so good with those announcements. So I used to run cross country when I was a senior here at Burlingame High School. In fact, I ran 4 years of cross country, which means I got my letter in cross country. If you ever seen like a Letterman jacket, I don't know if they're cool anymore, but I used to get letters for different things that you were in. So I got one for cross country, I got one for track, and I got one for choir, which was really cool. Yeah, the ladies love that one. Ladies love that one. And so I ran cross country, which was great for my tan line. Because I would run around Burlingame as a 150-pound scrawny little boy without my shirt on and just like these little itty-bitty shorts that rode up to right about here. And I'd just run all throughout Burlingame. I'd run into Hillsboro, like up Black Hawk, and I'd run all the way to the top, and I'd run down, about an 8-mile circuit I would do. But I usually wouldn't run with the dudes. I'd usually run with the ladies. Because, first of all, the ladies ran more my speed than the dudes. Which actually, that's really the only reason that I ran with the ladies. But when I was running cross country, I learned a lot of important things about pace, about pacing yourself in cross country. Have you ever heard the old adage, it's not how you start, but it's how you end, right? I think in cross country, it's not necessarily how you start or it's how you end. It's the 1,000 steps that you take in between. Because when you're running a cross-country race, it is all about pace. It's all about pace. And I found that there's certain things that can mess with your pace as you're running. For instance, if I'm worried that I won't hit my mark, I'll end up running too fast. And if you're running an 8-mile race and you begin to run too fast around mile 3, by mile 7, you're like, I'm overextending myself, and you begin to having to, go slower, and you won't be able to hit your marks. Also, if I'm starting to lose my focus, if I'm starting to not pay attention to my mark or my breathing or my speed, and I start looking at the birds or the trees or the rattlesnakes that are nipping at my heels, then all of a sudden I am now running sporadically. Sporadic running looks like you're running faster and then you're running slower, so you're not at consistent pace. You're just sort of going between one speed and another speed. And of course, this is bad for pace because you don't really find a groove, and you end up finding yourself sort of more erratic and not knowing if you're going to be able to hit your marks. Also, of course, if you end up getting discouraged or obviously tired or dehydrated, you end up running slower. And so that will affect running your pace as well. And so as a runner, you end up learning a lot about pace and a lot about control. But I know a lot of you guys don't run cross country currently. Or how many of you guys ran cross country up in here? Yeah, Lou, obviously Lou did. Linda did, and Linda, you're not Linda, you're Jordan. Jordan ran cross country as well, so you guys know that. But you guys have cars, right? Cruise control. How many of you guys have ever used your cruise control? Of course, what's the big reason why you use cruise control?
Save gas.
To save gas. It is more efficient to use cruise control than it is just to keep your foot on the gas and then on the brake. Did you guys ever know that? It saves you gas. It is more efficient for your car if you throw yourself onto cruise control. So during some stretches, when you're flying down, I-5 at 80 miles per hour, looking over your shoulder for CHP officers, and you're just throwing that cruise control, it's actually better for your gas mileage than if you just were to do gas and then brake. Or if you are going through, say you're driving up Highway 1, and you have your cruise control set on like a 35, for instance, it's actually better for your efficiency of your car as well. The reason why I bring up pace is because as a church this November, we are talking about slowing down, being still, and hearing God through the noise. And one of the deceptions of slowing down and being still, or taking a break, or a vacation, or a sabbatical, or a Sabbath, is that there's a temptation to go at 100 miles per hour and then hit the brakes, and then start up again and then hit the brakes, to go as fast as I can and then I burn out, to go at this pace on Monday through Friday and then this pace on Saturday and Sunday. And that erratic pace actually messes with our ability to be able to rest and work well. Some of us don't rest well because we don't work well. And some of us don't work well because we don't rest well. And so this is the art of pace that we need to be able to learn if we are going to Slovember well. And so as a church, we are looking at different daily challenges and weekly challenges that we can do in order to pace ourselves through the month in this very hectic time of the year so that we can find ourselves going into December in a healthy manner rather than an unhealthy manner. But I know that this time of year doesn't lend itself to very good pace, right? You don't have less to do, you have more to do. Holiday parties, family gatherings. You don't have less noise in your life, you have more noise in your life. Christmas songs already, commercials, talking heads. You don't have less to buy, you have more to buy. Food for parties and presents, really expensive Bay Area trees. If this is your first Christmas in California, welcome to really expensive Christmas trees. It drives my wife crazy every year. She's from Portland, Oregon, where trees are $10 a dozen, and so we come down here. A little shrub here costs $50, and she's just going crazy, and it just kills the holiday spirit out here. Our friends from Idaho are like, "How much do you pay for a tree?" It's absolutely ridiculous. But we don't have less to spend; we have more to spend, and in doing so, it doesn't lend itself for us to pace our finances, to pace our energy, to pace our time, to pace our schedule very well. So we have to be very intentional about pacing ourselves. And so we're going to be looking today out of Exodus chapter 16. So if you have your Bibles, you can open it up there. Or if you have your phone, you can open it up on the Bible app, and we'll be reading together. We'll be going through this entire chapter together. But we're going to be learning from the Israelites some very important things, very important lessons about pace. Specifically, God has some instructions, some lessons that He wants to teach us about pace. Because just like different things can affect my pace when I run, there's different things that it can affect you in your pace. If you're worried about finances, or paranoid about a relationship, or you are scared that someone's gonna, jump over you in a promotion, then that worry will cause you to run at a different pace than you would if you were comfortable and secure, right? Also, trust sort of gets us outside of our pace, right? If we lack trust that God is really in control, if we trust the people that are around us, if we don't trust that His plans are good for us, then that is going to cause us to run at a different pace and be more sporadic. And so, by learning how to pace, we are actually learning how to trust. Because I believe that God is here today, and He wants to teach us something about ourselves and why we're running at the speed that we are. So we're going to start off here in verse 1 of chapter 16. And the first lesson that we're going to be learning is that how to keep pace when our lives are falling out of place. We need to keep the full picture in perspective. If we are going to run at a pace, a healthy pace, we need to keep the full picture in perspective. Just for a little bit of context here, the Israelites are halfway between one place and another. God had just delivered them from slavery, and He is bringing them to the promised land. But how many of you guys know that after God has brought you out of one place and He is bringing you to another place, but you're not exactly there yet, you tend to get uncomfortable, you start to question, you start to get scared and fearful, and you start worrying if God's pace is going to be fast enough to get you where you need to go when you're expecting to get there. How many of you guys know what I'm talking about? Well, the Israelites here are in this middle ground of from where they were to where they're going, and God's going to teach them something about provision and pace. Starts off in verse 1. The whole community of Israel set out from Elam and journeyed into the wilderness of Sin, between Elam and Mount Sinai. How many of you guys feel like you're in between there, right? You're like halfway outside of a mountain. You're in between this place called Sin and this mountain called Sinai. There's no real sort of definition of where you are. You're just sort of like in transition in between land. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. And so they were enslaved in Egypt, this entire nation, and it's now been 1 month since God did all the cool plagues, and he, let my people go. No, you can't. Yes, I can. Blood turns red. The entire Nile. First, people die. And split the Red Sea. And so it's been 1 month since God did this entire huge provision for these people. And so now all of a sudden they find themselves getting restless. There too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread that we wanted. But now you have brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death. The complaints of the people. The people in this context, they were complaining about Moses and Aaron, right? They say, you brought us out into the desert. You brought us out here to starve. They complained about Moses and Aaron. But how many of you guys know that really the people weren't really complaining about Moses and Aaron as much as they were worried about the provision of God? See, God provided the leaders to bring them out of slavery. He provided a land for them to go to. But instead of recognizing for the process that they were in, they got grumpy over getting exactly what they asked for when they asked to be free from Egypt. When you forget what God has done, you lose your perspective. When you forget what God is going to do, you lose your perspective. Proper pace for you and I keeps the full picture in perspective. When we're able to operate at a healthy, godly pace, we keep the full picture in perspective. When I was a cross-country runner, I know a thing or two about keeping the full picture of the full race in perspective. Trent, will you throw up this picture for me? This was one of my races that I ran every year as a cross-country runner. I hope that you can see it. This race is, I heard that it's like the second most difficult race, cross-country race, or cross-country track to run in California or something like that. And it's actually right down the street right here in Belmont. So some of you guys drive by it every single day. It just sits right on top of a mountain. But what's very hard about this course is that it's very, very deceptive. So you start off, Ramon, I'm going to use your drumsticks right here. You start off right up here in the middle, and then they say, go. And at that point, you run a half mile down this sort of very flat sort of land, and then you run a half mile out, and then you run a half mile back. Now you might think, okay, flat land, so what? But that's very deceptive for a runner, because you expect to leave the finish line and not see the finish line until you get back. But very deceptively, they make you run past the finish line that you just started at, and all of a sudden, you still have more miles yet to run. And so at that point, they go and they swing you around on the outside over here, and it's a nice little jaunt, seeing the beautiful scenery of Belmont. And then there are these curves right here. You see that curve right there? There's a little valley in there, and there's lots of rattlesnakes that are at this Crystal Springs running course around here. And so it's very, very deceptive running through the Crystal Springs course, and then you find yourself going around right here. And then right in between mile 2 and mile 2.5, there is an incline that we called the Killer. They called it the Killer. It's a steep incline about this far that you have to run up, and that usually does people in very, very quickly. But as a cross-country runner, pace is everything. And in fact, if you're a cross-country runner, you know that when you're running up a hill, you actually want to run at the same speed that you were if it's flat. And if you're running downhill, the worst thing that you can do is just sort of do the free-for-all and just let yourself go like this, because you think that you're actually gaining speed. But in doing so, you're actually hurting your joints, and you are more exhausted by just trying to keep yourself upright than if you just pace yourself going down a hill. A little secret there. And so they're going up, and we go up the Mount Killer right there for about a quarter mile. But then you find yourself, you're only like a hop, skip away from the finish line right there, but you still have a mile left to go. And this is the part that always got me, because you would go inside, and then you come out, and then you would think every time I would think, okay, I'm coming around the curve now for the home stretch. But then you would go back in, and then you would come back out, and you think, okay, now it's the turn that I can come in and do the home stretch. Nope. I got to do one more in and one more out, and then around the horn before I can finally make my way back to the finish line. Deception is everything. It's everything when you're a cross-country runner. And so if you're going to run at a good pace, you have to keep the full picture of the race in perspective. Every single time, what messed with you is you thought that the finish line is just around the corner, when in reality there was another turn, there was another hairpin, and all those turns and all those mind games just got the best of you every single time. This is important for you and I because you may feel like you're in a desert, but you have to remember the slavery that you've come from and the promise that God is bringing you to. You have to remember and keep the full perspective in mind. The Israelites, they lost perspective. They lost sight of where they were in the context of God's story. God was teaching them something, a process, but instead they wanted to go back to slavery or just simply death. If you are going to run at a proper perspective, you have to remember what God has done and help that sustain you to what God is going to do. Because the best days are yet ahead. I feel like this is a tension that us believers have to constantly be in. We have to constantly remember what God has done, and we have to hold tight to the promises that we can't yet see. And in that tension, it enables us to run the pace that we need to run in order to get to where God is calling us to go. Otherwise, we either fall back to where we were, or we give up completely right in the middle of the race. And if we lose perspective, we may quit right at the last hairpin turn when God said it's just around the corner. But we say, you know what? I've seen this before. I've been deceived. I'm losing perspective. I'm losing the full picture. Guys, I know pace is hard on the peninsula. This is not an easy place to live. And it's really easy to lose perspective of where we are in God's story. But remember where He was, where you've been. Remember the things that He's promised, the goodness. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. And trust that God is going to bridge the gap along the way. The second lesson that we have today about how to keep a pace when our lives are falling out of place is that we need to learn to be patient through God's process. So God, hearing the complaints of the people, obviously they were hungry. God wants to take care of our needs. He listens to our prayers. He prefers if we don't do it when we were, blaming someone or complaining about it. But, He'll still listen to our prayers, nevertheless. And so He listened to their prayers, and He directed Moses to tell the people of Israel every morning to go out into the desert and collect all the manna that you needed for the day. Manna was like a bread that miraculously, was out in the desert, and they would be able to pick it up and cook it. And, it's not as good as sourdough, but what are you going to do? And so instruction was to go out and collect the manna, collect all that you need for that day, no more, no less, and the next day there will be more manna prepared for you. So this is what the people did. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, and some a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had how much? Just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. What a great principle here. What a great principle that every family had just what they needed. Sometimes we're deceived in thinking that what I need is more than what I actually need. And here God always provides enough. Then Moses told them, do not keep any of it until morning. But some of them didn't listen, and they kept some of it until morning. But by then it was full of maggots and a terrible smell. Moses was very, very angry with them. This is a warning to some of us who feel like we need to get it all today. This is a warning for some of us with our compulsion to think that I need to take care of the next week today. This is a warning for some of us that fear how God's going to be able to move tomorrow if I don't see it happen today. Because God's process is to teach us that He is our sustenance day by day, not necessarily week by week. In the Proverbs it says this: wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Also, Jesus is in the Lord's Prayer. He says, give us this day our daily bread. Daily bread. Don't give us this day our weekly bread. Don't give us this day our monthly bread. Don't give me what will sustain me for a year so I can come back in a year and ask for more. But give us this day our daily bread. Because those who gain wealth hastily will ultimately dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Why do I think that God is teaching us this? Why do I think that God wants us to come in a daily fashion rather than in a monthly fashion or in a weekly fashion? Because if you're anything like me, if you get too much of a good thing at once, you will blow it every single time. How many of you guys have heard stories about someone winning the lotto and a couple months later they're broke, right? Because if you don't know how to manage a little bit, you don't know how to manage a big bit. And so every single time they find themselves bankrupt after winning a huge amount of money. In the NFL, every rookie that is drafted into the NFL has to go to what's called a rookie symposium. And in the rookie symposium, a big portion of that time is spent on what they should do with their money. Or more importantly, what they shouldn't do with their money. Because they found these young rookies would finally get a paycheck and they would blow it all, and then they would get cut 2 years later and they would have nothing left over, and it was really bad PR for the NFL. And so they said, we need to teach these kids how to handle their money. Because if you get too much of a good thing all at once, you will usually blow it in the meantime. Also, if you guys watch Shark Tank, right? A lot of times investors will, instead of giving a lump sum of money to an investor, they will gradually give it to them in sort of phases, because if they get it all at once, they'll blow it on a big party and they'll end up wasting all of it rather than just a little bit at a time. See, the same sort of principles can be applied to you and I. I think that God is trying to teach us to go to Him in a daily fashion rather than just in a weekly fashion. If I'm allowed to make this spiritual, God wants to teach you to go to Him in a daily fashion, to daily go to Him in prayer and in the Word, and to rely on Him in a daily fashion rather than looking for my sustenance every Sunday or just during my squat. But He is looking for you to go to Him in a daily way. And so I believe that's maybe for some of us in here, we're waiting for greater provision from God. We're waiting for greater blessing from God. We're waiting for God to really just open the floodgates of just houses and monies and yada, yada, yadas. But He's saying, but you got to pick up only your daily allotment. You're still not doing it in a daily fashion. You're expecting this all in one lump sum. And so for you and I, we need to learn here that we need to be patient through God's process, because He is trying to teach us something through this. The last lesson that we have today is how to keep our peace when things are falling out of place. We need to prepare for margin even when provision is minimal. We need to prepare for margin even when provision is minimal. Let me show you what I mean by this. Later on in verse 23, he told them, Moses, this is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath day set apart for the Lord. So bake or broil as much as you want today, and set it aside for tomorrow. So they put some aside until morning, just as Moses had commanded them. And in the morning, the leftover food was wholesome and good, without maggots and odor. Why is that important? Because before, when they collected more manna for the next day, what did it end up being filled with? Maggots and odor. And so here, when God said, tomorrow's the Sabbath, you're not going to do any work, this provision I'm going to give you is going to sustain through tomorrow. This manna didn't have any maggots or odor. So Moses said, eat this food today, for the Sabbath is a day dedicated to the Lord. There will be no food on the ground that day. You may gather the food for 6 days, but on the seventh day is Sabbath. There will be no food on the ground that day. Some of the people went out anyway on the seventh day, but no food was found. How many guys would like test this, right? Either like you forget to pick up the food, or you'd be like, I don't know, I'm just gonna test and see, if this is actually legit or not. It kind of reminds me of every time I have a headache, I shake my head just to see if it's still there, and sure enough it is, and it just makes it worse. And so I'd probably be the one that, does no one else do that? Yeah, okay. I got another crazy back there. And so here God gives them provision to be able to last through the Sabbath. The Lord asked Moses, how long will these people refuse to obey my commandments and instructions? They must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you. And this is the part I underlined in my Bible. That is why he gives you a 2-day supply on the 6th day, so there will be enough for 2 days. On the Sabbath day, you must each stay in your place. Do not go out and pick up food on the 7th day. So the people did not gather any food on the 7th day. How many of you guys got a check from grandma and you thought about all the cool things that you could do with it, and then the next day your transmission goes out? Anyone? You're like, oh man, I could have really used that for fill in the blank, right? Or how many of you guys, you guys got a raise and you thought about all the cool stuff that you could do with it, right before a huge dentist bill? How many of you guys? And when that sort of stuff happens, it makes us feel like our knees have, our legs have been, sort of cut out underneath us, and we can feel defeated in this moment. But I think that this is actually God's hand at work. Sometimes he gives you enough, he gives you more than your daily portion to be able to take you through when provision isn't going to happen tomorrow. And so for you and I, this is a very valuable perspective to be able to have, that we need to prepare for margin even when the provision is minimal. Some days God gives us our daily bread. Sometimes pace is recognizing when he gives us multiple days provision all at once. And it's our job to steward it well through the drought. Some of you guys, you're going to find yourselves sort of walking in or falling into some provision. I urge you in those moments, don't pull an NFL rookie mistake. Don't pull it. You're sitting on a large sum of money, or a large sum of time, or a large sum of blessing, or a large sum of fill in the blank of opportunity. And maybe God is keeping it there because something's going to happen on the other side. Something's going to happen on the next day. Or maybe on a positive light, maybe God is giving you that so that you can break, so that you can rest, so that you can Sabbath without breaking your pace. Some of you guys desperately need a vacation, but you don't get paid for vacation, so you can't take it. But how healthy is it for us to be able to take a break, to be able to Slovember, to be able to take a full day off at work, and know that what God gave us yesterday is going to sustain us for today. And I can just get back on the horse tomorrow. Because provision and pace is ultimately an exercise in control. Who's in control of this situation? Will today's provision be able to keep me through tomorrow? Or will I be like one of the ones going out and looking provision for today, even though it is nowhere to be found? God is trying to teach us to prepare for margin, even when our provision is low. Even when it is low. Even when we don't feel like we have much margin to give. But properly pacing preserves the promise perfectly. What an alliteration is that, right? Proper pacing preserves the promise perfectly. At this point, that's just ridiculous, right? That's like looking through the source and looking for some keywords to be able to find what you want. But it's incredible that the manna didn't spoil when they were supposed to wait. The manna didn't spoil when they were supposed to wait. You and I, we need to be able to break when God instructs us to break. Whether that's in a daily fashion, I need to break at the end of my day, I need to put away my phone, and I need to be present with my wife and my children, right? God's going to take care of that margin. I need to break on Saturdays. I trust that God's going to take care of the message. He's going to give me all the setup and tear down guys that I need. I'm going to trust that God is going to take care of that margin. As the year goes and rent increases, God, I trust that the margin is going to be taken care of. This is a process that you are bringing me into, and I'm just going to entrust and believe and have faith that you are bringing and you are going to clear the divide for us. And so we need to remember to keep our perspective, to be able to operate in patience and in preparation. But of course, as we talk about manna today, as we close up today, Exodus 16 isn't the only place where Scripture talks about manna. We also see manna being talked about in John chapter 6. And I think the worship team come up now. Jesus is talking with some of his followers, and they ask for a miraculous sign, just like God gave the Israelites a miraculous sign in Exodus chapter 16. And this is what they asked. Show us a miraculous sign if you want us to believe in you. What can you do? After all, our ancestors ate manna while they journeyed through the wilderness. And the scriptures say Moses gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said this, I tell you the truth. Moses didn't give you bread from heaven. My Father did. Moses didn't give you the bread. My Father did. Your job didn't give you the paycheck. My Father did. You didn't go and snatch up that relationship. My Father did. You didn't earn your health. My Father gave it to you. And now he offers you the true bread of heaven. The true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, give us this bread every day. Jesus replied, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. As much as our daily bread, our daily manna is provision and God daily provides, as much as we need his hand over us and sort of intersecting into our daily life, God is pleading with us that he would be our daily sustenance. And ultimately, he is the one that is going to help us keep the proper pace. I don't know what pace you're running right now. If you are in a terrain of going through mountains and the weather is kind of stormy and you're at a solid 35 and just making your way through. Or maybe the circumstances in your life are, you have lots of opportunities, a straight road ahead, and you're nailing 75, going straight down, as fast as an arrow, and you know exactly where you're headed. No matter what your terrain or whatever your direction or whatever your pace you're running, God pleads with you, let me be your daily sustenance. Let me be your daily bread. Let my heartbeat and your heartbeat be the pace that we run together. So that on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday I am with you. On Thursday and Friday and Saturday I am walking with you. On Sunday and Monday, and it continues on and on. And we can find ourselves in a place of trust and peace because he is walking with us. Will you stand with me today?